Hi, friends. It's good to be with you again. And on behalf of the First Presbyterian Churches of Highland and Marlborough, welcome to this fragmented, dislocated worship service. We're glad you've joined us for a semblance of a portion of worship. It feels like we're on the Star Trek Enterprise, communicating through these flat screens, but at least there is a moment of connection. And may God's presence be felt somehow within it. And as we gather by screen, I hope you'll think of the people, for those who ordinarily worship together, I hope you'll think of the people that you normally sit next to or see from afar in the church and try to picture their presence and feel their presence today. This is the third Sunday of Easter, and it is April the 26th, 2020. Our scripture lesson this morning is the 24th chapter of Luke, verses 13 through 35, and the sermon title is Who Does Not Know? They were the last to know. The group of friends were off the grid. Maybe you heard the story about the dozen friends who went on a rafting expedition down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. They put their rafts on the river on February the 19th. Now, it was shortly after President Trump had granted clemency to the former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. And February 19th, that was the date when Democratic hopefuls for the presidential nomination gathered on a stage in Las Vegas. And it was Bernie Sanders who was leading at the time by double digits. On February 19th, there was great relief in mainland China that the number of coronavirus cases was declining. And here in the United States, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued its first statement that travelers to Japan and Hong Kong should practice usual precautions. Such was the state of the world when a dozen friends launched a 25-day journey down through the Grand Canyon. The group finished their expedition on March the 14th. And upon completion of their journey, they were completely ignorant of the state of the world into which they now returned. That group was one of the last set of people on Earth who did not know that a pandemic was sweeping the globe. They had no idea that a health and economic crisis had unfolded in every region of the world. A representative from the rafting company met them at the end of their adventure, and he asked if they had been in contact with anyone during their trip. They had not. They were completely off the grid. He sighed, took a deep breath, and then he launched into it. Since they had left, the coronavirus exploded in the United States and around the world. Italy was under lockdown. The stock market was plummeting. Professional sports were suspended. Many schools were closed indefinitely. Infections were growing exponentially. Tom Hanks even had it. The conversation between the group at the Grand Canyon and the rafting company representative was much like the one between Jesus and the two people on the road to Emmaus. That conversation occurred on the day of the very first Easter. Cleopas and another person were talking about all the things that had happened to Jesus. And the two did not recognize Jesus when he joined them on the road. He was a stranger to them in that moment. And Jesus seemed to be clueless about any of the events about which everyone was talking. Cleopas was incredulous when he encountered him. "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" he asked. Cleopas began to explain why the two had been animated in their conversation about all the things that had happened, and why they were looking sad. All of Jerusalem had been affected by the life and death of Jesus. The people living in that region had hoped that Jesus would be the prophet who would deliver Israel from its Roman oppressors. Instead, he was put to death by the religious authorities. The hope that Jesus was the Messiah was dashed by his crucifixion. Naturally, his followers would be grieving. They lost the person who gave them hope that their misery would end and their lives finally would be different. Until Jesus was killed, their future held promise. People throughout the region knew who Jesus was. His arrest and execution was a moment without parallel. This was one of those everyone knows exactly where they were kind of moments. We know these kind of events. Everyone knows where they were when they heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the shooting of President Kennedy, the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle, the events of 9/11. Everyone in Jerusalem knew exactly where they were when they heard about the death of Jesus. Everyone, it seems, except this stranger on the road to Emmaus. Cleopas could not imagine how it was that this man did not know the things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a mighty prophet in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. How could this stranger not have known? The people had hoped that Jesus was the one to redeem Israel. Hope died on the cross. Yet now, on the third day since these things took place, some women of the group astounded the rest with news of an empty tomb and a vision of angels who said he was alive. Cleopas brought Jesus up to speed about the commotion that had all of Jerusalem in a tither before that day, and even more so 3 days later, now that the body had been seen by some of the women. Cleopas then invited Jesus to stay with them in the village. Jesus accepted the invitation to receive hospitality, and at the meal he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he was vanished from their sight. It is in the breaking of the bread that Jesus finally is recognized. There were 4 simple actions that led to the moment of recognition. Jesus took bread, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it to them. Jesus took, blessed, broke, and gave. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Ah, the simplicity. There was nothing more than taking bread, thanking God for it, breaking it into pieces, and giving it to those who were together. In those 4 gestures, the risen Christ is known by Cleopas and the other person. During what is an otherwise anticlimactic moment, Christ is made known. Revelation occurs on the edge of the main story. Away from the cross, away from the tomb, away from Jerusalem, Christ is recognized. And we now have an opportunity similar to that of Cleopas and the other person on the road to Emmaus. As we pass through this period of global cataclysm, we have refined our day-to-day activities. We are stripped of our busyness. We are unable to dash off to various activities. We are forced to focus on the basic functions of our lives: eat, sleep, rise. Eat, sleep, rise. Days fold into weeks, weeks fold into months. We hope that months won't fold into years. Some people are blessed to be able to work from home. We are blessed that some people leave the safety of their homes to work on our behalf. Some adults are school teachers by default as they guide their children through their lesson plans. All of us, though, are mindful of the rituals that ground our existence. We eat, sleep, rise. Eat, sleep, rise. We are narrowed to the essential core of our being. We are alive. We isolate to remain alive. We do what we must to live. We wonder, universally, when will there be more to our lives? When will our lives change? We are like Cleopas and the other person on the road to Emmaus. As did they, we wonder how to proceed when hope is dashed. And like those on the road to Emmaus, our salvation is right before us. Though our eyes may be kept from recognizing what is in front of us, our salvation is right before us. God is with us in Highland and Marlborough. Just as Christ was on the road to Emmaus, God is with us wherever we are. God is present immediately before us. God is with us in the breaking of bread. God is with us in the simplicity of our existence. God is with us in the mundane. God is with us here, now. God does not abandon us when our world falls apart. God creates, recreates, heals, restores. Christ is alive. May the Spirit of God help us to see the divine in this moment. May God help us to believe what we cannot see. The promise of salvation is now and forevermore. Amen.